Suppose that a hacker decided to target you one day and just methodically ruin your life, or do something to someone you love that ruined their life. Then how would you react? What the hell would you do? Would you try and get revenge? And if you did want to get revenge, how on earth would you even begin to go about it? And how on earth would you determine at what point you've been successful? That's one thing. Maybe not the central thing, but it's one very important aspect of the plot of Second Sister, which is the book that we're looking at today in this episode. It's by Chan Ho-kei, a Hong Kong writer, and as a guest on the show, I haven't got Mr. Chan, I haven't got the translator of Second Sister, Jeremy Tiang. I've got a friend of the pod on the show for her third time. It's Michelle Deeter. So we're going to be looking at Second Sister and coming at it from as many angles as we can. I didn't reread the book for this episode, so I read this one I think a year ago now. Michelle also read it quite a while ago, but we both sort of brushed up on the plot and did our best to give you guys an interesting and at times perhaps even deep conversation, if you can believe it. But before we get to our conversation, before you hear from Michelle, there is of course the Terrific news, the translated Chinese fiction news. Now I've got 5 whole items today, so I'll try and go through them all swiftly. 3 of them are on one particular theme. So we've got sort of a sandwich. That one theme is Qian-Qiu-fan. So we have a Qian-Qiu-fan sandwich, basically. The first news item, this is the bread. This is not about Qian-Qiu-fan. It's a little Zoom event that's coming up. It's Gwilhalf and the Borderless Book Club, 2 little, I don't know what you call them, online presences that promote literature in various forms. They are teaming up for the International Translation Day to have, I think it's 3 or 4 publishers on to talk about some of their work on translated lit. So they are Sinuist Books, Fitzcarraldo Editions, V&Q Books, and Peyrine Press. And then there's a little panel of translators at the end who are going to talk about the problem of untranslatability. One of them is Christopher Payne, a Chinese to English translator who's done a few books of Sinuist. The Sinuist Books section of the event is it's with Nikki Harman and Jun Liu, who are co-translators of an upcoming Jiapinghua translation that Sinuist is going to bring out. The English title for that is going to be Sojourn Tea House. I forget exactly which Jiapinghua book that is in the original Chinese, but I suppose if you know it, you could probably work it out from the English name. So yeah, that is that news item. Now we can get on to the Qian-Qiu-fan sandwich, Stanley-wich, I guess we could call it. That's his English name, by the way. Stanley. So the first of these 3 Qian-Qiu-fan news items is actually about his co-author Kai-Fu Lee. Now the 2 of them have written a book that's come out recently called AI 2041. And to help promote that book, I guess Kai-Fu Lee has gone on a podcast called Intelligence Squared that I've recently started listening to, which shamelessly is targeting, in quote marks, elites as its listeners. You just have to listen to the sort of ads that appear on the show. It's quite funny. Ads for like investment companies and investment apps catering for rich idiots. But anyway, you don't have to be a rich idiot to listen to the show. It's a pretty interesting one. Kai-Fu Lee talks about basically everything the book covers. If you haven't heard yet, Kai-Fu's contributions to the book are the non-fiction, sort of the predictions about where AI is going in the medium term. Qian-Qiu-fan contributes short stories like within the framework of what Kai-Fu Lee thinks is possible, or within the bounds of what he thinks is possible. I've not read it yet. I will definitely be reading it. But the interview Kai-Fu does with the host of Intelligence Squared is a good one to sort of whet your appetite. Yeah, I could make fun of the interviewer a little bit, but I won't. I'll leave it at that and go on to the next news item. It's a TED video, not a TED talk, but some sort of TED video that our guy Qian-Qiu-fan did, again to help promote AI 2041. I think it sort of runs through the day of a young woman who's living a few decades in the future, and it looks at how technology, I guess specifically AI, changes her daily routine, or makes her daily routine different from ours. That's all I can say about that. It cuts between that animation and Qian-Qiu-fan himself speaking with a sort of plain background. So yeah, it's there if you want to watch it. Now the third news item, this is meta news again. This is some self-promotion. On the Terrific Patreon feed, I did a 80-minute breakdown of one of Stanley's stories, Coming of the Light. This was as preparation for what should hopefully be an oncoming episode on the main feed, but what I did was I read it And as I read it, I annotated on a Google Doc all my thoughts. And then for this recording on the bonus feed, I read the annotations and used them as a jump off point to sort of analyse the story. And what we ended up getting was partly analysis, partly trying to solve the story, like a riddle or a puzzle box sort of thing. So if you want to know more about the short story, or if you've read it and thought, oh, what the fuck was that? Someone explain this to me. I think I've solved it. Maybe the story doesn't even have a solution. Maybe that would annoy the author if I talked about it in that way. But I think, personally, this is a story that you need to read between the lines to sort of understand everything going on in its background. That's really where my analysis focuses on, is the background, not the foreground. And I think that was an intention by the author. But even if it wasn't, I think it's a fruitful reading. So yeah, that's the end of our Chen Fan sandwich. Now the last news item, this is some Sinosphere literature that you can, Sinophone literature that you can read for free. It's an excerpt that's been put up online by Words Without Borders. It is an excerpt from Ho Sok-fong's Maze Carpet. The excerpt is called Dark as a Boy. Now this was translated by Natasha Bruce, an esteemed translator of Chinese to English, who has done other translations from Ho Sok-song, including Lake Like a Mirror. I guess Natasha translated 2 short story collections from Ho Sok-song. I say I guess, I'm reading this from the website, so I'm not guessing. Pardon me. But yeah, Maze Carpet was the first of those collections published in translation, and the second was Lake Like a Mirror. Or perhaps Maze Carpet wasn't published fully in English and this is an excerpt from it. Whatever, I don't really know. But the whole story is up there for you to read online for free in English, so do check it out. Okay, that is the end of the Church of Fake News. This is actually a second take. My first take was much more sensible, but I'd done something a bit stupid with my microphone, and most of it wasn't really viable. So that's why this time I mocked the neoliberal elite podcast and made some fun of myself for abusing the English language there when I used I guess when I was actually 100% certain. Anyway, enough of my yammering and on with two-way yammering, the interview with Michelle Deeter. Hope you enjoy it. I think it was a good one, but I always say that, so why should you trust me? On the show, we have Michelle Deeter. Hello, Michelle. What's passed since we last spoke on the show? Because we spoke in real life not very long ago.
Not too much. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. I translated a couple of tattoos today, so that was odd.
Is it a client secret to tell us what they were?
Yes, technically, yes.
Okay.
But just short, random stuff today. I'm also preparing for some teaching because I'll be teaching at Newcastle University again.
Would you like to reintroduce yourself for any listeners who are hearing you for the first time? Maybe just a potted version.
Yeah, so my name is Michelle Deeter. I am a Chinese English translator and interpreter based in Manchester, the original Manchester in England. I also teach, and it's great to be on the show acting as a reader today, because in the past I was acting more as a translator, and this way I don't feel bad gushing about this excellent translation.
Right on. No, it's always good when I get someone who's just a reader. Before I ask you the first question about our book for today, a much more important question, what state is the American Manchester in? I know it exists, but I don't think I ever knew where it is in the country.
There could be more than one. I know there's one in New Hampshire.
Right. Maybe that's the biggest one.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the older ones, right? That would be in what we call New England. So, yeah. But There's one in Jamaica, right? There's probably one in Australia. They're all over.
Yeah, I might have brought it up on the show before, but where I'm from, Dundee, is supposedly one of 6. And I'm sure I mentioned this in the show. I visited one of them in Nova Scotia, and it's like some houses surrounding a swamp, and there's a little restaurant where I think we had fish and chips or something.
Oh, how funny. Wow.
Yeah, it was weird. But moving swiftly away from Nova Scotia to Hong Kong, which is that's the setting for our book that we're going to be talking about for this episode. It's Second Sister by Chan Ho-kei. I already gave you this disclaimer, but I'll do it for the listeners. I read this one quite a long time ago. I think almost a year ago, actually. Maybe exactly a year ago. So I've refreshed myself on the plot a bit, but I might be, for tactical reasons, talking more about themes here, or relying on Michelle to help me out a bit with the plot.
We'll be fine.
We should be okay. Yeah. But before we talk about the book, let's look at the author, Chan Ho-kei, who is the first modern in like 21st century Hong Kong writer I've done on the show. Everyone else from Hong Kong I've done has been a wuxia writer from decades past.
Oh, so, of course. Yes.
Yeah. We had Jin Yong. Yeah, Jin Yong. And then, damn it, what was he called? Gulong. Yeah, Gulong, who is like Hong Kong / Taiwan. Although I've learned Chan Ho-kei himself is living in Taiwan these days. Is that correct?
As far as I can tell, yes. But I didn't, triple check those sources. So that's my guess.
Right. And what you have some factoids on him, right?
Yeah. So we just mentioned he is a Hong Kong writer who was born and raised there, and he definitely feels passionate love for his hometown. I found it really interesting that he studied computer science as his BA. It just made sense. I was like, oh, no wonder this story is like so perfectly executed. And one of the main characters is able to explain some really tricky hacker stuff, but it all makes sense. It's because he actually studied that very thoroughly. The other thing that I found really interesting is that he started reading Arthur Conan Doyle, so the guy who wrote Sherlock Holmes, when he was in his 5th or 6th year. So I assume that means when he was 10 or 11. So he was already kind of aware of the Western style of writing a mystery really, really early on. He got stuck in, and then he started reading Gokumon Island by Seishi Yokomizo. And that author is Japanese, still a big influence for Chan Ho-kei. And for him, that was like this huge turning point because he realized that you could take a Western genre like mystery or crime fiction and you could set it in an Asian country like Japan. So he calls that kind of localizing. You're using these themes or these kind of beats that we would expect in the genre in the West, but you're completely putting it in the setting where you want to put it. He must read a lot, though, because when I saw some of his interviews and read some of his interviews, he would just cite like all these American authors and multiple mainland Chinese authors and Japanese authors. It's just incredible. So I think that contributes to the way his work is kind of more fleshed out. Yeah, so that's some of the most interesting facts that I found. The one last thing I would probably add is that he thinks crime fiction can be simplified into who done it, how done it, and why done it, or a combination of those 3 elements. But he's not really that enthused by the who done it, because the who done it is just, who is the killer normally. But you have to have the killer be someone in the set of characters that's introduced fairly close to the beginning of the story. Otherwise, the reader will feel cheated. And he enjoys the how done it and the why done it more because you have more possibilities. You can probably put a twist in there and you can make it more exciting. So I just think it's so interesting that I have not seen that many stories in Chinese that are so aware of the mechanics to make the story good.
Yeah, it felt like what would you say, a mystery by a guy who is a writer of mysteries for people who read mystery novels. It felt like that was a big part of the thrill, so a technical thing. Now you mentioned a Japanese mystery author, a mystery author who was a big influence on him, and a thing that jumps right out at anyone who's holding a copy of Second Sister in their hand, like I am. If they're looking at the back where the author and translator mini bios are, it says about Chan Ho-kei that in 2011 he won the Soji Shimada, the biggest mystery award in the Chinese world. And that jumps right out at me because Soji Shimada, I suppose, there's no SO character in Mandarin, is there? So you know that this can be a Mandarin word. This is almost certainly the name of someone Japanese. And I confess I've not done much more than Google the guy, but Soji Shimada is a Japanese novelist from Fukuyama in Hiroshima Prefecture. So I don't know if you know a great deal about this, but from what I've gathered, it seems like there's a fair amount of influence from Japan in China's like mystery and detective genre fiction. Do you know much about that, more than me and my sporadic Googling?
I would say that you're probably on track. As far as I'm aware, yes, it's possible that there's more stuff translated from Japanese into Chinese and vice versa. So they would have a longer history of influencing each other. And it seems that the kind of like the taxonomy or the way that they structured the genre of mystery in China is completely lifted off the way they structure it in Japan. So in Western mystery, we have our cozies, we have hard boiled, we have noir, and that could be our taxonomy. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Whereas in Japan, there's two styles. There's one that's called like classic or orthodox, and then the other one is called social style or social faction, meaning trying to be realistic and reflecting social issues. So so he realizes that all these different kind of boxes exist, but he doesn't really fit in any of those boxes. The fact that he knows what a cozy is means he can choose to just sprinkle some of those elements in his book if he wants to. I find it really fun.
Yeah, that's interesting. I can actually see, looking at this Soji Shimada Wikipedia page, it says he's the pioneer of the Shin Honkaku, which means new orthodox logic mystery genre. So he must be on that camp. And like I was saying about Second Sister, there is a feeling that there's a technical like mystery for the sake of a mystery. So that might put it in the orthodox camp, but it deals with some real social issues. It's I guess sexual assault or exactly. Groping, if we're being really specific, and nasty things that sort of orbit around that in society in Hong Kong. And that leads me to a couple other points, and this is all Michelle's search, by the way. A couple factoids you found. So he, in his relation to Hong Kong, he says he was born and raised there, so of course I have feelings for Hong Kong. And you've also got, he said he thinks all Hong Kong writers have values. So that's really interesting that he's ascribing feelings and values to the place, although not necessarily spelling out why. It's an assumption for him that if you're a Hong Kong writer, you have values, that presumably there's some social concern in you, and probably in your writing too. So yeah, I don't know if I have a question there for you, but
I agree.
Maybe we'll get more onto that later.
No, it's interesting. He definitely has a foot in the Orthodox camp and still a foot in the social issues camp, as far as I can tell. But that's part of what makes it so fun. Like, it's a page turner because you want to know like how to undo the puzzle or how the puzzle is solved. And yet it's a really interesting look at Hong Kong. I don't know if you've ever been, Angus, but I've been a few times.
Been twice.
Yeah. So it just feels very real. It feels extra chilling because it's not some evil character that is so over the top that you would never think you could meet someone like that in your life. It's folks who have motivations and who kind of operate in a way that still sort of makes sense, which is, just makes it more interesting on like a deeper level and on the reread.
Yeah, my experience of Hong Kong both times, it's like a lot of mainland Chinese expats dropping in for a long weekend. That was me both times, just in and out in like 2 or 3 nights. And so I got a strong feel of like what it's like to walk about in the city, but not really what the society is like, what it is to work there. And this thing that I got from the book wasn't like a landscape portrait of the society, its breadths and alleyways, but more like it's a vertical look at the city, the strata, where we have some very ordinary people living in not great conditions in one of the big high rises, our main characters. And then we've got a guy who's our villain, because we know who he is from the start. He doesn't seem like he's particularly wealthy either, but he's in like the office grind sort of zone of Hong Kong.
Yeah.
But we do see glimpses of like the higher, what would you say, the higher strata, the business elite of society. And then our detective N seems to be a guy who's deliberately extricated himself from all of that. Like, he lives in a very grim building, but seems to have access to huge amounts of funds, is able to pass into the wealthier spheres, yes. But doesn't really, it's hard to even know who he really is, but it seems like he prefers to live on cheap food. And if he has a choice, he'll go to the
and he can swim in whatever circles. That's something that surprises his client. very early on. It's like, hang on, normally you wear flip-flops, right? Like, how are you able to put on this smooth voice and this, polite demeanor to make people think that you're actually very well educated and, from maybe a different class even?
Not to compare positively or negatively, but that's one thing that made it feel really different from not all, but a lot of mainland Chinese fiction I've read. It's just a very different, it's like a more, well, funnily enough, if it's just one city squished into not a lot of space, then weirdly enough, feels like a much more compressed, claustrophobic society or society captured in fiction than most other mainland Chinese stuff I've read. So we already talked about this being Hong Kong lit, and I've bookmarked that as important on this show because we never really properly dived into it before. But I wanted to ask you, Michelle, what's your experience with Hong Kong lit? Like, how much have you read, or have you had any engagement with it as a translator, or have you met interesting people who had interesting things to say about it? Like, what's your experience?
I haven't translated any Hong Kong lit yet. I guess my door is always open. I have read some short stories by Hon Lin Chu and by Dorothy Tse. And I read The Borrowed, which is another book by Chan Ho-kei. Also, I've read the book by Yǐnqíng that you mentioned. I completely forgot that he's a Hong Kong writer because it takes place in a fictional past, but he's definitely a Hong Kong writer. That's just a great example. So it's limited. I think I'll have to go seeking it out more because this has been so much fun to both read and reread.
Absolutely. I should ask you as well, what's your experience in Hong Kong, the real place? What did you see when you were there?
So I've been to Hong Kong twice, like with a guide, right? With a friend who is actually a local. And I've been another 2 or 3 times where I was supposedly the local, even though I'm American and, I only lived in Guangdong province across the bay. So what was really interesting though about being there with my friends was kind of seeing how long the hours were that they worked and like the teeny tiny apartments that they had and all the shortcuts and the special things they knew about kind of getting around in the city. I found that to be really, really eye-opening. And even then, right, it's only a sample size of 2. It's not like I saw all of Hong Kong society, but had lunch a couple of times, like in a picnic in a park and stuff. So we saw a lot of cleaners also having their lunch just kind of out in the sunshine. And you can tell, like, if you know what to look for, you can tell that the city does have just so many different people of different backgrounds. And just about everybody has to work to the bone to just get enough to survive. So I did find that even though the first few chapters can feel almost like he's putting it on real thick, actually, I've just met so many people that really do work as hard as Nga-Yee, our older sister character in the book.
Yeah, what you said there about getting around, that's one thing I remember. It was so different from navigating like Shanghai or Beijing. One reason, because again, verticality, there's lots of slopes in a lot of the city, but like the public transport feels pretty different. There's that really long what is it, escalator? Yeah, the longest escalator in the world, or one of them. And the ferries, that was one of my favorite things visiting the city, just as a tourist, ferrying out to Lama Island. And you go from being in this intense cosmopolitan megacity, and then you're on like this beach paradise, and yet you can see like a power station. What's the word? I'm really not on it today. Power station chimneys not so far away. It was a trip in more than one sense, and the book's a trip too.
Yeah, exactly. But again, it doesn't feel like anything is done just for the like dramatic effect. It feels like these are real people, and that's part of the fun. Yeah.
Getting back to the book, you're right. Some of the settings are sort of cinematic, like some of the business settings.
Yes, yeah.
It does feel like a movie at points, but like we go into the nitty-gritty of people's lives, like schools. I remember there's stuff about rent and the main character's family getting sort of screwed over just in their working situation. So the property, I know property is a huge issue in Hong Kong, but that comes in as well. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's a gritty social realist book, but like those things are there, and you can see that they're not just something Chan Ho-kei wanted in to put a bit of an wanted in there to give the book a bit of an edge. It's because they're just real things going on in Hong Kong.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So we've talked a bit about the setting. I could try and talk more about it, but I just embarrass myself. I'm going to throw in one quick thing. Hopefully it's not too much of a curveball, but I just wanted to say I've seen that this book has something like 3 different publishers in English translation. I think maybe because that's for different zones like North America, UK, and maybe it's changed hands once or twice. But
the third one is Canada. Yeah.
Right.
There's 3 different markets.
Right. Okay. States. So the States, the US, and Canada. The States, the UK, and Canada. And the UK edition is from Head of Zeus, who are, for whatever reason, they're one of the best publishers, I think, of English translated Chinese fiction. But because they have a lot of great translated Chinese sci-fi they've picked up from Tor and taken a bit further on their own. But they've got some really interesting other translated Chinese books. And these 2 Chan Ho-kei books we mentioned, this one, Second Sister and The Borrowed, are up there. And the design on this hardback is just beautiful. It's so nice. It's got crisp colors. It's included some Chinese characters on it. So like it has a hook line in English of gossip, rumor, revenge, just very small going horizontally. But then vertically in the traditional Chinese characters, it's got the same words as 2 character words. And yeah, it's just design wise, it's one of my favorite books I've done for the show. That's on my shelf easily. Just wanted to say that. Now we can go on to the talking about the actual plot. So I'm going to give a really, really cod summary, not even summary, like synopsis, sales pitch, and then maybe you could, if you feel there's any really key stuff I've missed, you could fill it in. Does that sound all right?
Yeah. And for all the listeners, this is your spoiler warning.
Yeah. We're going to adopt a we don't care policy to spoilers. So if you really don't want to know how any of the mystery unfolds, then read the book and come back later. That's all I can say. Right. Yeah. Okay. So we're in Hong Kong, and right at the start of the book, Nga-Yee or Nga-Yee finds that her 15-year-old sister Siu-Man has committed suicide, but she doesn't really want to believe it. And I think we're led to believe that she committed suicide because she had been sexually harassed, groped on the MRT, which is the underground in Hong Kong. I hope I've got the acronym right.
It's the MTR.
MTR. Good thing I checked. The MTR. And it seems like she was bullied online, and this may have led to the death. I believe that's how it goes. But Nga-Yee has her suspicions. She thinks there's foul play involved, so she seeks out a private eye, and she gets about the best private eye she could have possibly hoped for. A guy going by the name of N, but it takes some persuasion. N what does he say? He only takes cases that he's interested in, and he's not interested, but he seems to go along with it, and they embark on a highly digital 21st century investigation with a lot of traditional Sherlock Holmes style sleuthing involved, like on the ground investigation involved as well. So like the bit I remember best is they're scoping out the school that Siu-Man went to, and that involves getting through like poorly protected systems to find class lists. I think N maybe impersonates people in group chats as well to get info, but also showing up in disguise as a concerned parent and stuff. So there's really yes. interesting offline and online investigation and hacking. So there's a term called social hacking. Have you heard of that?
Social engineering. Yeah.
Where like, what's the simplest way for me to hack someone's bank account? Well, it would be to look over their shoulder and see them enter the PIN. So there would still be there could be still some digital hacking involved there, but there could be social or just physical boots on concrete actions you can do that make the hack that much smoother and faster and more potent. And that's far from something I'm interested in. Far from something I'm expert in, but something I find very interesting. So anyway, we have all that going on. And meanwhile, like you said, Chan-ok doesn't like whodunits. So we basically know who our baddie is. It's a guy called Chung-nam, I believe. Is that right?
Yes.
Chung-nam, who's a sleazy fellow inside, but to his colleagues on the outside seems like a sort of a normal office worker, and he's a horrible piece of shit, and he's the guy who's sort of behind. I guess I'm not going to spoil all the twists and turns, but he's the killer essentially, and the thrill of the book is sort of finding out how N is going to lead Nga-Yee to that conclusion. I think that's about the best summary I can do. Do you think there's anything we really need to add?
Yeah, so I totally agree that N figures out who he thinks that there's a team working together, and he figures out who that's going to be very early on. So we kind of have to follow the Luddite technophobe Nga-Yee.
Oh yeah, I should have mentioned that. Yeah,
to understand like how he's coming to these conclusions, and to understand that it's easy to follow a hunch, but you need to be open to other possibilities. So, all the twists and turns are like laying in wait in the later chapters, but you're just going like, wait, what happened now? Wait, what happened now? So it's very useful to have this character who doesn't even know what the onion rooter is. So, then you get the opportunity to explain what Tor is and to explain how social engineering works. And it's great though, as well, she gradually learns. So she attempts social engineering on the security guard at the school at one point. It's funny. I just think that's great. A little kind of way to make sure that all the readers can understand, even if they don't know everything about the internet like N does.
Yeah, that was a really key thing I should have mentioned, that she is the word. I don't know if the word Luddite is used, but she's more than just a technophobe. She's there are people who are just not so good with technology and don't seek it out, and then there's people who must have actively avoided it because they're so completely clueless, and they're under the age of 60. So yeah, she's that foil. She's sort of, you could say, a bit of a Watson to his Sherlock, although I don't think Watson is he wasn't a Luddite. Did you find her believable, given that she's not a granny, but she's totally clueless about really basic stuff? Did it strain, what's the word?
The suspension of disbelief.
Yes,
was I able to hold it, I guess.
There you go. Did it strain your suspension of disbelief?
I think there were some parts where it grated a little bit because N is always so caustic and making fun of her all the time. It's like, come on, she's trying her best and she's grieving as well. But in other ways, it's like Hong Kong is such a modern city. Like, surely even just to talk to the housing authority, you would have to know how to make an application online. So yeah, there's a couple of parts where I think she might be able to do this on her own, and so it seems a little unbelievable, but you get over it, I find.
Yeah, I'd agree. And yeah, their relationship's quite funny, and you're right, he's he comes across as a real bastard towards her, to the point that it is just quite funny. And I couldn't tell, probably it's intentional, I couldn't tell, well, is he really this nasty, or is he just sort of, what's the word, like pretending to be unfriendly so as to create a professional boundary, or or with a new person have a barrier. And I also wondered, wait, is this going to be the cheesy thing where the author starts off with them hating each other, and then by book 3 they're married and they've got a kid?
Oh God.
I thought it might go there, and I don't know, I didn't.
Spoiler,
think
it doesn't go there.
No. I was gonna say, I could see that being done well, but I kind of didn't really want it to, and sure enough, it doesn't go there. N does show he has that he doesn't hold her in total contempt, but it's not really clear that he has a normal personality in that sense, where he has a warm side. From what I remember, he has a core. It's just not that kind of core.
Yeah, so we learn a lot about those two characters. Nga-Yee and En are our two main characters. Siu-Man, of course, she can't speak for herself, but we kind of get glimpses of her through interviews with her classmates and reading some of her messages and things. And so another thing that I find almost unbelievable, but at the same time, people really do work that hard, is how little the older sister knows about her sister when they actually live together.
Mm-hmm.
She keeps on getting completely surprised at how much a 15-year-old girl can hide or, not share her emotions. Sometimes I find that to be a little unbelievable, but for the most part, I think, yeah, moody teenagers, they can they can have layers.
Oh no, not to divulge my the world of my family and my extended family, but if you ever think you completely know a relative and they don't have some piece of information that can throw you on or flip everything on its head, think again.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, I think it sounds like a deliberately edgy thing to say. You can never really know someone completely, but I think there's truth to that. You can never know if you know someone completely. There's always room for doubt. Even if you do, you can never be certain that you do. That's my opinion.
Can we talk about the names? Can we talk about the side characters?
Yeah, do it.
Yeah, so we have Nga-Yee and Siu-Man and Cheongnam, who all have very Hong Kong sounding names. And then the classmates of Siu-Man all have English names.
Mm-hmm.
And I did just a tiny bit of research. I didn't actually read the Chinese original, but I looked at a couple of synopsis and things, and I thought for a second, hang on, there's no English names in here. Like, where did they come from? So Jeremy very helpfully told me how that came about.
Let's pause here. The translator is friend of the pod, Mr. Jeremy Tiang.
Yes, my friend of the podcast, Jeremy Tiang, let us know how these English names came about. He and Ho-kei met at the Macau Literature Festival while Jeremy was still translating the novel. And they sat down in a cafe and kind of thought about what the names could be for basically these other 15-year-olds that Siu-Man knew. Ho-kei came with a list for names of characters. And they kind of talked about which one should be posh, like Miranda's pretty posh, and Violet sounds very nice as well. I found them very, very believable.
Yeah.
And then Jeremy picked Violet because the Chinese has the word or the character for purple in it. So Violet is a pretty appropriate name. So that is something that doesn't exist in the original, but I think it's just an added layer that just makes the English all that better. And it's cool that they could cooperate like that in person.
Yeah, no, that's a great thing to point out. I think Violet, she is, how some people are a really good match for their name. They just embody their name, and other people are, it's just a coincidence. There's no real aesthetic connection between the person and the name. But that character Violet is a Violet.
Yeah.
In all her good and nasty qualities, if you see what I mean. It's funny, actually. I'm pretty sure when Jeremy was on the show with Yang-Ge talking about Strange Beasts of China, I did my fancy pants word drop of the episode, or terminology drop, nominative determinism, the idea that things become what they are in some way because of their name. It's just funny that comes up again in relation to Jeremy. I also wanted to say I shouldn't name favorites, but I think out of things I've read, he's one of my favorite translators of English language translated Chinese fiction. I think it really shows that he's a writer. And yes, like the prose in this translation, it's not flashy. It's not rococo, as one reviewer described his other translation, Strange Beasts of China. It's much more just serving the story, I think, which would be appropriate, I think, for a crime story. But it's really smooth and slick and readable, and you can tell that he's picked his words and assembled his sentences better than other translators might, or many other translators. And I think that's because he's a great writer. And I
completely agree. Completely agree. He's a great speaker. He's a great writer. He takes the time to read passages out loud to make sure that they actually flow. And even in terms of research time, he said he visited some of the places in the book in real Hong Kong to make sure that the setting looked correct, that, you know, the description of the MTR and everything was as correct as it could be. Especially nowadays, people would call you out if you described something in Hong Kong in a way that wasn't really true. So it's that attention to detail and that kind of doggedness to getting everything like working it out until it really is perfect. That does make it an enjoyable read. And like you said, he's adaptable to different styles, different genres, which is really impressive, honestly.
It's true what you say, that in the era of the smartphone, anyone could drop by the real place, document it on their phone and be like, well, this looks nothing like what it was in the book. Definitely, like when I visited places that were settings in stories I loved, or settings in a story I was going to try and write or had written without having been there, I felt anyway, a little bit like a sleuth, because you're connecting things that you only had as ideas with a real place. I was going to say, or it occurred to me to say, when you mentioned Siu-Man being present but not being able to speak because she's dead. She exists in the book's past, and this is not the angle. Later in the episode, I'm going to try and get all smarty pants and quote an academic book, but it's going to be genre theory rather than like weird philosophy, which is where I usually try and take things. Time is a recurring theme in these stupid things I bring up, but the time and detective stories do have something interesting going on together, because they're almost always an attempt to rebuild a time in the past, reconstruct it, or resurrect it. And that's something I found pretty interesting, learning about what Siu-Man's life was in relation to the people she knew, and that being someone in the Goodreads reviews for this book I was looking at mentioned that it was sort of like getting 3 plots for one, and I wasn't totally sure what those 3 plots would. Actually, no, I think I do know what they would be. One would be the main investigation following our male and female protagonist. One would be the sort of replay of the last days of Siu-Man, and then the other would be following Chung-Nam as he tries and fails to wash the blood off his hands, figuratively speaking. So time is an interesting one in any detective story, but where we're using the internet, which freezes time and archives it, I think is especially interesting.
Yeah, it's really cool how as well, like, specific moments in time are recorded by the internet, but because Nga-Yee is not so interested in the internet, she records time more emotionally. And she's often off the mark. Like, I'm not saying that her memories are accurate or that her emotions like correctly read the situation, but she's kind of using a different metric to see the same story in the same events. So I think that that's an interesting layer as well that I haven't seen as much in other detective stories.
No, that is interesting. I'm not pointing a finger, accusing or quizzing here. Did you listen to the last episode I did with Shenyang and Nikki?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember I mentioned Professor Robert Winston's TV show where he made a guy cry by feeding him porridge from
yes, because he remembered, his time in World War II, and porridge brought him right back.
Yeah, and there that was an emotional or some kind of non-rational memory, bringing back something real from the past. But there was another thing on that show where Professor Winston had a go at showing these various people who were all something like 40 odd pictures from like the 70s or something of from the ground of a balloon in the air and just a very barely visible kid's head poking over the balloon's basket, a hot air balloon. And he told each person individually, oh, this was a picture of you from when you were a kid. You were on that hot air balloon and it rose and you were waving to your parents and you were a little worried that you weren't going to see them again, or something like that. And they checked to see how many people then would say, yeah, I do remember that. And I don't know if it was more than half, but a significant number of the people said, oh, yeah, I think I do remember that. And I think it's maybe no coincidence there that they were using an emotional event to create that distorted false memory. So yeah, that is an interesting thing. But I was mostly just taking the chance to bring up that TV show again, because those are the only two things I remember from it. But I think they're really illustrative.
Yeah, it's cool.
Okay, let's get back on point. The next point I was going to try and hit was the characters. We've talked a bit about them already, Nga-Yee, Siu-Man, and the killer, Chong-nam. Maybe we should talk about Chong-nam, because we've talked a little bit about the two young women already. We've talked a bit about N already, but we've not said much about the villain. So do you want to start us off there? Because I think once we get going, my memory might start resurrecting some of my emotional impressions.
So he's very narcissistic. We can kind of tell that he looks down on his colleagues and definitely looks down on his boss. He's definitely ambitious. And then we have a couple of passages that show that when he was younger, people didn't think he would make much of himself. So he still kind of has something to prove, or he has a chip off his shoulder. He's going to become more than just an office worker. He's going to become like a tech titan or something.
Right.
So every chance he gets to meet an investor, to meet with a Westerner, he thinks this is it. I'm going to be able to start my own company now and be, this amazing startup founder. Just so many ideas. The thing that really brings him down is the fact that he, I think they call it, gives in to his darker desires or his darker impulses. And so no matter how much ambition or even hard work he puts in, he's not going to get very far.
Yeah. No, that's brought a lot of memories back. Yeah, he's human, all too human in a way, that where he's in that particular band of IQ levels where he's pretty smart, but he also grossly overestimates his intelligence. And
yes,
I think I'm probably in that band.
That's a good point. Yeah, a lot of people do that. I probably do that too.
Yeah. What am I trying to say? I thought he was a compelling villain because that thing of having a default derision for other people, I'm a little bit guilty of that sometimes. And I think what makes me different from Chong-nam, I hope, is that I recognize it and try not to listen to it. I think it's a little bit of maybe Arrested Development. I think it's quite a teenage way of going through your life. So maybe it's not so surprising then that some of his darker desires involve, like, I guess, sexually harassing and abusing teenage girls.
And controlling people, calling them his slave, and it sounds like keeping them locked up. Like he's really doing stuff that is disgusting. Yeah,
pretty horrible. And I guess it controls the thing there. This character isn't really in control of his own destiny, but really wants to be in all the ways you described by being a big boss. But there is another hot, nasty way of doing it, of controlling people much more powerless than himself, younger people.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't think I've got much more of a take on the guy than that. I did think the obsession with American businessmen was interesting. That was one of very few things that reminded me of mainland China. Slightly unfortunate fixation on someone just because they've got a country's name attached to them. And the other things were, going completely tangentially, the visit to the wonton shop where our heroes go and get some cheap noodles. That could have been mainland China, easy peasy. And the experience of riding the metro, I guess that's kind of...
Oh yeah, a packed metro, you would get that.
Yeah, any metro anywhere. But that's where the groping incident happened. So I guess that can take different forms in different countries, different contexts. I don't know how much we want to go into that. That might bring us back to the villain. But do you want to talk about any more of the characters, or do you want to talk about metros?
Yeah, let's move on to transportation and how society views people doing things, I guess.
Yeah. I remember when I was living in Shanghai, they had to go experimenting with women's only carriages. I think they color coded them pink. I think that was Shanghai. I think they might have done it in other cities.
Yes.
Hangzhou maybe got there first, perhaps. And I think around the same time in the UK, there may have been talk of having like women and children's carriages, but I don't know. I don't know if anything ever came of those things, or if they were just passing experiments.
I don't know either. I grew up in a town that didn't have a subway, so some of this is stuff that I've only learned as an adult. But it's interesting how like Siu-Man is not the one to talk up. There's someone else who witnesses the assault happening and says, no, you need to report this. I'm going to take you to the police. Let's report this together. And so that's part of it that I find very believable, because it would be not only embarrassing, but just so shaming, even though Siu-Man shouldn't feel like she's done anything wrong, because she hasn't. So I thought that was very realistic, that some people don't even realize what's happening. And then one woman kind of takes it upon herself to turn this into a big deal. And then it just keeps snowballing, because it does end up going to court, and that has consequences, right? That is indecent assault, I think is what they end up calling it. But it's sexual assault in this country.
Yeah, I think in your notes you sent me before we got on the line, you mentioned one sign that this is definitely Hong Kong, maybe compared with the mainland, possibly, is that this incident is taken seriously.
I mean, it's 2021, so I'm not going to say that first-tier cities in China would look away as much. I think there's starting to be more cases of saying, okay, sexual assault is not okay. But still, the fact that the person went to court, was prosecuted, and had to spend time in jail, the fact that all these things happened, and that these forums were opened so that people could talk about both the victim and the, I guess, the alleged person who does the groping, that perpetrator, let's say. Whereas that's something in China, they wouldn't necessarily have that forum to discuss it, or it would be briefly discussed, and then within a couple of hours, that discussion would be shut down. But that's kind of key to the novel, is the fact that so many people can be discussing, like, did this girl deserve it? Or, is she a slut? Da, 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 da. That couldn't happen in China, that kind of social build up in that discussion.
Yeah, I'm not trying to completely switch the topic away here, but you mentioned it's 2021. I thought it would be good to say that, given that this is a very internet-centric book, it would be good to note what's the gap between the publication in the original Chinese and the English. And the Taiwanese publication was 2017. This edition by Head of Zeus is 2020. I don't know if it says also English translation copyright by Jeremy Chiang 2020. So I guess there's not a gap between this edition and the Canadian or US ones. So I guess the internet did transform a lot from 2017 to 2020, but not fundamentally. It's not like where, I think when I did Death Notice, that was from like 2014-15, but purposely set in like 2005, so that the internet didn't completely
play a role.
Didn't make the investigation take 5 minutes. But funny. Getting back to your point, I thought this was interesting because when N is explaining the intricacies of the internet and IP addresses and accessing so-and-so site, all of that sounds like it would more or less work here in the UK, because Hong Kong's, I don't know, well, perhaps I should caveat this and say I could be slightly wrong here, but it's part of the global internet. It's not a national intranet in the same way that China is, the mainland China is being cut off from internet norms by the Great Firewall. So that is another thing that makes this definitely Hong Kong lit, is that it's online. If you were going to make an online detective story in the PRC, well, it probably would be hard to get published. But even if it didn't cause any problems, the internet landscape that the characters would be navigating would be just so different. Because even if I don't make any positive or negative comment about internet censorship, or sort of how every app and website in the PRC is domestic and national rather than international, even if I take any value judgment out of that, it just makes things inherently different, a really different system.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Accidentally, that's led me really nicely to the next point, the hacking. So we already mentioned that there was social engineering involved, and it was pretty fun to read, especially as
Yes.
Nga-Yee gets a little bit more adept herself. But just in general, like what did you make of it as a reader?
I remember the first time around just thinking that Ho-kei must have done a really impressive job in research. And then when I, started listening to interviews and things, I was like, oh, he knew about this all along. Like this is just background knowledge that he happens to have because that's what his degree was in. So the whole story made a little bit more sense when I realized that. I do think it's incredible, like the way he's able to explain a man in the middle attack and then have something funny like a killer rabbit, which I think is a Monty Python reference, but I can't confirm that.
I'm sure it is.
To just kind of, make it both colorful and to explain things, but without kind of using a magic wand. It's like, no, this is doable. If you're in a cafe using public Wi-Fi, this is doable. It just really enriches the story, I find. Yeah.
I'm going to bring this one up later, but have you ever heard of or watched Mr. Robot TV show?
No.
Well, I won't bother going into like the plot or the themes because there's a lot going on there. A big part of it is that we're following a hacker, and he's very much a hacker in like from the N school, except I think he could have amassed some wealth for himself, but he never does. One theme is he's trying to bring down the wealthy. But yeah, it's equally entertaining because a lot of the hacking. In fact, the opening scene, he's in. I guess I'll spoil it. So if you guys don't want to have the first scene of Mr. Robot spoiled, shut your ears. But he's in a cafe. He manages to invite the owner over for a chat, and he tells the owner he's noticed that out of all the cafes he's visited to like hack or to go online, this one has like a super fast connection. It's got like hyper optic speed, and that made him curious. He couldn't leave it alone. And I won't spoil what he uncovered, but he tells the owner, look, I've learned that you're up to no good. So yeah, there's like the way physical spaces fit in with the internet and hacking. I just find that really interesting, that it's not all totally virtual. Physical access via one way or another.
These drones and things.
Yeah, totally. Using drones to do things like that. Devices. There's one more thing I'm going to say about this. I have a friend who's at Dundee's Abertay University, which is lower ranked than Dundee's other uni, Dundee University, but it has a really good like computing and digital department. And I've got a friend there who as an older student, a student in his late 20s, is doing an undergrad in ethical hacking. And I really wanted to talk to him about that because of the show Mr. Robot. I was like, do you watch it? And he said yes. And I said, is what he does, is that hacking? And he said yeah. And my friend, he's called Brian, he gave me a really interesting example of physical access in relation to hacking. He said like like if you want to hack a power grid or like a hidden server system, sometimes, especially in a country like Scotland, the place where the hardware is stored will be like way out in the middle of nowhere in a field and with no paths and possibly quite dangerous terrain. And part of the hacking involves getting to that building and getting in the door. And then you're in a prime position because no security guards, assuming you haven't triggered an alarm, no security guard is going to come in and stop you. And from there, you can turn off a wind farm or something. So that's like the opposite kind of physical access in the claustrophobic world of Second Sister. But if listeners are tickled by these sort of ideas, then this is like it's just a perfect book.
Definitely. It just feels like there's this element of spy and counter spy going on. But you're still enjoying a detective novel at the same time. It just has so much going on. I think there's something for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. I think we can move on to our next section of questions, where we're going to do a little bit of investigation and analysis the first thing we're going to interrogate is this book as a portrait of life in Hong Kong. Now, we've kind of already done that. We've basically already answered the question, could this book be set anywhere, by answering no, or yes and no, because like internet-wise, could maybe be anywhere, but in terms of social issues, there's plenty of things which are specifically Hong Kong. So I've got an interesting way of framing this, because previously on the show, first time you came on this podcast, we talked about another crime novel that you translated, and that was The Untouched Crime by Chen.
Sijin Chen.
Sijin Chen. Right. I was going to say Zijing.
His name doesn't make any sense. I think he has a 2-character surname. Like he has 3 surname characters. It's so weird.
Right. Okay. Interesting.
Anyways.
So we did that one, and that was, well, I won't do all the analysis myself, but that one was definitely mainland China, and yet the nominal setting of Hangzhou didn't really have much bearing. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, but I think so too.
Yeah, but how do you think the setting of that book compares with this one? Aside from the importance or the featuring of a noodle shop, I think that the little noodle house in Untouched Crime had a very similar vibe to me to the one in Hong Kong, but I can't think of many parallels apart from that. But what do you think?
Yeah, I think that part of what makes this book so engrossing and so fun is the fact that every single page feels real. The school feels real, and you just have so many details that there's 2 reasons why that's not achieved in The Untouched Crime. I think the first reason is that even though Zijin Chen is also I'm pretty sure born and raised, but definitely from Hangzhou, he doesn't seem to kind of put that emphasis on it. So one, I think it's actively that he's more interested in fleshing out his characters than he is in fleshing out the city,
right,
or the setting. But then the other aspect of it is honestly that editing process. So having translated 2 more of his books that are hopefully going to be published very, very soon, I've seen where the Chinese side will cut things and say, well, we don't want to keep this in just in case, or, well, we know that we mentioned where this professor worked before, but we would rather use a fake name this time around, which is just heartbreaking to me. It's like, but in the first book, we said it was this university. How can we not keep saying it's this university? So aspects that were in the original Chinese version, or, maybe it's a little bit anonymized, but a clued-in Chinese reader would know where that's supposed to take place. That's all just kind of scrubbed out. And so that's an issue of kind of the editing style, but also, just the political context of those publishers and what they have to deal with. So it's really disappointing, because I do think that makes almost any story in any genre better, to have that very specific detail and to make the reader feel like there's sitting on the shoulder of the main character, or somehow floating right behind them and experiencing every step along with the main character.
This is maybe dubious logic I'm using here, but how about the nature of the crimes? Because the Untouched Crime, again, spoilers, we have sort of like a justified killing in a way that a bad guy is oft, a good / morally grey clever guy does what he can to cover it up, and things play out from there, and the truth is, or some of the truth is slowly revealed. So it's quite morally complex. In Second Sister, it's like, not to denigrate it, it's a little bit like an episode of Columbo. We have a real slime bag did the crime, and our quirky detective and his I was going to say nice girl sounds weird, his
client / sidekick.
Yeah, her ordinary, what do you call that? The straight woman, Nga-Yee, the Luddite straight woman, Nga-Yee, tags along, and they get to the bottom of things as well. So it feels more conventional in a way, mystery wise.
Well, absolutely, because as we said, Ho-kei is reading so much of Arthur Conan Doyle and all these other classic Western authors. So I feel like he thinks that's important to show like this is the world in chaos, and then at the end of the book kind of chaos has to be resolved. I feel like that's a tenet of crime fiction, whereas in China you don't necessarily have to play by those rules. You can decide to just kind of let the story take a different path, or again leave things very morally gray. You kind of end what feels like a chapter too early because somebody's not locked up, and you're like, well, hang on. Don't we have to lock up the bad guy at the end of a crime fiction novel? And it turns out in mainland China you don't, which is just, I don't know why that is. It just seems to be the way that is.
It's a sign that it's not North Korea or Mao Zedong's China, that you don't have to have the heroes saving the day at the end of the novel. That's a nice consolation, I suppose. I was going to say, something occurred to me here. This goes into science fiction. Surprise, surprise. I've remembering a time I attended an online meeting of the London Chinese Science Fiction Group, where Han Song, the god Han Song, the Chinese sci-fi writer, was present, because the group were talking about a story of his. Admittedly, his title I've forgotten, but the premise of that story is a guy realizes that everyone else is sleepwalking at night. The whole of society, when they go to bed, and then they all sleepwalk and do another working day, doubling the work hours of the society, but not necessarily doubling the productivity. And he's like the only awake man, or so it seems. And I think the conclusion of the story goes something like he just makes his peace with it. And lots of people in the discussion wanted to ask Han Song Lao Shi, is this a critique of Chinese society? And I thought it was great he was willing to go online and be open to questions like that. Yeah. And I think he did say more or less like, yeah, this is a critique, a social critique in some ways, but he was never that blunt about it. And at one point he said something like, and this really stuck with me. He said, yeah, this is a representation of how I feel in a way about living in modern China, but it's not my manifesto for rising up. This is a depiction of like the dark bargain you have to make, where you have to accept that, okay, I'll go along with things. A collective plan, maybe it has some dark sides, but it might be a way to improve my life or hope for a better life. Like, I think it was, wow. I'm not doing it justice, but like you could see that in any country really, but I think in China, that in mainland China, that feels really relevant. And maybe even in Hong Kong now, I've heard that in the wake of basically the tightening of authoritarianism, mainland style authoritarianism in Hong Kong produced a bit of an effect where all people can really do as a consolation is keep their heads down and work as hard as they were working, because it's that or leave really.
Well, even in Second Sister, it was published in 2017, but it has, I think once or twice even, it says fleece or get fleeced. That's what happens in Hong Kong. So there's this darker side. Maybe there's a couple more people in Hong Kong that are brave enough to say, these are my values and I'm going to stand up for them. But at the same time, there's still lots of people that are either just trying to get by or realize that they have to make a bargain. And for their own self-preservation, they go ahead with that bargain.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, that's sort of how I feel living in the UK these days. Not to throw shade at England, but I've moved from Scotland to England, and Scotland is far from the land of saints, but I do feel the bargain got that little bit darker. And I feel like, I think if I had chosen to live in mainland China for the rest of my life, I think, that's paying into the tax system of one of the most authoritarian regimes in the world. Like that's a dark bargain as well. So maybe we've stayed on this theme for too long, but I find it, what's the word? It makes sense to me that even a book as subject to like careful editing, if not outright censorship, like The Untouched Crime, is morally murky because it's a tricky society in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. You're constantly navigating and it's not clear what you're navigating through. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. My next question was personas, and I'm trying to use this word as its creator, Carl Jung. I know I said I was only going to get deep in genre for you. That was nonsense because we're getting Jungian. We are getting weird. But one of his less weird ideas, or from earlier in his career, was the idea of the persona. And this is basically a mask. The idea that all of the outward facing parts of our personality, or even in a little beneath the skin as well, these are persona. These are different sort of masks or settings that we have as appropriate for different situations. And if anyone listening thinks, oh, I'm above that, I'm a real authentic person, think about your behavior with your mom or your dad versus with your friends versus with your workplace. It's actually healthy to have different personas for different situations. That's what a well-adjusted human being does. It's not inauthentic at all. But in this novel, we have, I guess, personae operating normally, normal human behavior, but then a lot of the characters have proper disguise, personae as a disguise. And I noted, my feeling is this is far more applies to the male characters, En and Chung-nam. But I wanted to ask, do you agree with that? Or do you think we could say something interesting about Nga-Yee or Siu-Man's?
Siu-Man, definitely.
You're right, yeah.
I mean, because she tries to be the perfect daughter. They don't go over that relationship very much, but, you know, she's never asking for more from her parents because she knows that there's not enough money. And yet she's trying to be cool with her friends, you know, trying to impress her boyfriend, trying to impress Lily. And even like to her greater classmates, she's trying to show that she's not that affected from the sexual assault that she experienced. So
right.
she is navigating a lot of different, here I go with navigating again, but she's in a lot of different situations. And I guess she's that kind of person that aims to please. So in order to seem like the perfect insert noun here, you know, the perfect sister, the perfect friend,
the perfect second sister.
Yes. She makes herself seem like a certain person. And yet the way that Nga-Yee is so surprised by the things that she does, that suggests that she isn't just one person. She must have had many personas and used them kind of on a regular basis like we all do.
Right. I'm going to drop another reference here. Do you know much of Twin Peaks?
Nope.
Okay, right. All right. I won't spoil anything, but Twin Peaks is set in a little town in Washington State in the US, like in the mountain, between the mountains and the forests and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And events are kicked off with the discovery of the dead body of what is she, like the homecoming queen, this extremely popular teenage girl, Laura Palmer. And a lot of the plot of the first and even the second season is learning about all the double, triple, quadruple lives she led before she was murdered by, well, I'm not going to say who killed her, but there's a whole, it seems almost crazy just how many connections and lives and personas she had that only isolated bubbles of people knew about. And even then they'd only know one or two of the personas. So it's almost like it's to the point of impossibility, the kind of thing she adopted. And a lot of it was like, it would be a lot of it parallels Siu-Man. A lot of it's having been a victim of abuse or putting on a brave face, or maybe in a way that Siu-Man is not trying to be more grown up than she really is.
Yes.
I don't know if Siu-Man does that. I don't remember, but I'm sure that's a real thing for a lot of teenage, I guess, girls and boys, but it probably is a much more dangerous world to walk in for a girl. But yeah, there's some fan of the show did something quite funny. They tracked all the classes she was supposed to be taking in school, and then pieced together all the other activities she was doing using as much information as the show provided about like what days she did the things on, how long they would have taken. And they tried to work out like what was her weekly schedule. And it was literally, she would never stop. She would never sit down because she had all these roles, and it was just so perfect. It was a great visual illustration of like how stretched thin this girl was. And that seems like a really good parallel for the investigation into what Siu-Man was doing with herself.
I'll admit that N has many sides to his personality. He seems like the complete bastard towards his clients, and he seems like the chess player that seems to always win towards anybody who's in a triad or in some kind of gang. And yet he can smoothly transition to the business world or be the most interesting guy in a bar. So he definitely has his different personas that he's very capable of switching between. And Changnam is equally fluent, I would say, at showing a certain personality at work. And then when he's on his own, he's doing other things. But I think that almost all of the characters have something. You could argue that this older sister, Nga-Yee, doesn't even realize how most people have different personas in different situations. However, even she, she hides her grief from her colleagues and kind of just tries to be a good employee without explaining like, oh, I might need this, or, right now I'm struggling to focus on work. She's hiding all of those problems from people. And I would argue that that is also a way of putting up a mask.
For sure. Yeah. Oh, what was I going to say? Yeah, I was going to say, follow on from what you said about N there. He seems like he also makes me think of Laura Palmer's Impossible Timetable, because everything that he pulls off seems like, hang on a minute, how does he have the time? How does he have the sort of mental capacity to juggle all these balls at once?
Yeah, is he sleeping? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, is he sleeping? Right. It's not like it's not believable, but like, how does he have the capacity to do it? It feels different though, because his the things he is doing all have a very clear goal. It's machine-like in a way, whereas a Siu-Man or a Laura Palmer style juggling of a million balls feels a lot more like you're not in control. You're juggling the balls.
You're doing it to survive.
Yeah, to keep them in the air, not to perform an amazing feat.
I totally agree.
The next point I had was about social disconnection, which almost feels too easy to bring up talking about the internet or a great big city like Hong Kong. But I do think it's true that it's so true it's boring to even say that the online world, or living in a world that's been shaped by the internet, can be socially disconnecting despite all the virtual connectivity. Do you think we see that in the book?
Yeah, a little bit. Especially because that's what N is exploiting all the time. So you make these assumptions, or your brain uses shortcuts all the times. And that's how N will just put out a little link onto your phone, and you click the link, and all of a sudden he has access to your entire phone. So just assuming that your phone is secure is enough to get N to find a way in and get all of your info. But it's more, this question I think is more related to relationships. So before I run away on a tangent, I think that it's possible to be disconnected with people that you think you know well, as we said before, but also online. If you're just reading about them and you've never actually met them, then you can just assume that what the forum says is true. And so you're completely unaware of what's really happening. And even if it is someone that you do know in person, but you mainly interact with them online, you might not really understand who they are. So it takes some digging, and takes someone with superpowers like N to figure out the full extent of a person, I guess.
Yeah, you said in your notes that you sent me that characters or people in real life who realize that the internet is just a tool, and I guess not an end in itself, are happier. So if you know what you want out of it and you use it for that, and then you don't overinvest further than that, then it doesn't have to be a drain on you, or it doesn't have to be something that reprograms your brain without you knowing it. And I think that seems pretty true. That's my experience running the social media for my podcast. It's a much more chill experience than being a mindless zombie consumer of social media, which I also do, because using it for specific goals doesn't put me under all the weird abstract social drives. It's just a numbers game, and it's a numbers game that it doesn't matter if I lose, and that feels like a lighter load than the whatever weird thing all the rest of the internet does to my brain when I'm just being myself and not the podcast guy.
I think it's really healthy to see the internet as a tool, like it's a way to make my work easier, or it's a way to keep in touch with family that's really far away, things like that. But because of the way some websites, they have their algorithms, they have their teams designing them to be as addictive as possible. It's also very easy to forget, like, no, this is just a tool. And right now I don't want to do this kind of work. So I need to turn off the tool. I need to set the tool down, whatever it is. But sometimes seeing somebody else not understand how the internet works, or, just be completely attacked by the internet helps you remember, like, oh yeah, this is something where I have to actively make choices rather than sleepwalking into a big mess. So it's helpful to read even in a fiction context.
Totally. The problem with the internet is other people are there. If it was just if it was all just Google Docs and web apps, that would be lovely. But but if other people weren't there, it wouldn't be fun, or it wouldn't be the awful, wonderful thing it is. We wouldn't be talking.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I put a last question there. Do we see a way out by the end? I guess I don't really know what I mean by that, because in a way, you could say it's a bad ending because Nga-Yee has been initiated into the internet.
I guess it depends. If you end it on her ending, then it's harder to see the answer to that question. But chapter 10, exclusive content on the Translated Chinese Fiction podcast.
Yes, you heard it here first, folks.
Chapter 10 was added in the English translation. And so then we see kind of the way out for two other characters. We'll just leave that a little ambiguous. But basically, there's a bit of misdirection running through the novel, as Jeremy explains. And the reader is kind of supposed to believe that Violet To is being helped by her brother, and that brother seems to kind of be Cheongnam. Then we realize that Cheongnam has no relation to Violet at all, but Cheongnam is still a bastard. He still does terrible things and is still connected to Nga-Yee, just in another way. So while it does kind of make sense by the end of chapter 9, we never really understand who Violet's brother is unless you're reading really, really closely. And so adding chapter 10 to kind of see what happens and to see like how he decides to build a new life for Violet, right? She's not just relying on her library forums and her classmates. She feels like she has a family, and she has, like a house where it feels more like a home. I think all of that does kind of answer the question of, when you see your brother every day and you're not just texting him, then that can improve your life a whole lot. That can make you realize what's important and what you care about. So yeah, I think chapter 10 actually answers that question.
Yeah. I have family members who I much prefer being around in person to online. And I guess there's probably, I couldn't think of who they are, but I might know people I prefer talking to online than in real life, but no names spring to mind, and that's probably a good thing.
Well, I mean, relationships need tending.
Yeah,
and
true.
Communication is easiest when you're able to see that person and their micro expressions, and you can read the room, quote unquote. And it gets more and more difficult if you don't have that nuance. So I think for most relationships, if it's one that you value, the more FaceTime you get, like literal face-to-face time you get, probably the better. But if it's, if it's a professional relationship, if it's an acquaintance, then it might not be such a big deal if you're seeing them face-to-face as often.
Very true. Wise words. Right. So in my little notes here, I've written, let's step back from the obscene and talk about what it means. Although we haven't, it's not a grisly, gutsy book. The obscene stuff is basically the villain and what he tries to do to girls like Siu-Man. This is a complete side question, but I know some crime fiction has like definitely like a lot of British crime fiction goes out of its way to be sort of grim and bitter, noirish, or horrifying. But I don't know, this one, I think it did feel more like a classic detective story. I didn't feel like I was in a noir world.
I guess it depends. I think if you read the posts on Popcorn and you think, oh my God, if that was happening to me, I could not go back to school. That kind of stuff can be, maybe psychologically, can also feel very noir and grim. the rumor mill or
Mm.
people being accused of being a slut. Like I found that pretty not scary per se, but
Dark.
something that I could relate to. And yeah, something that if that happened to me, I would find that to be very bleak.
Bleak,
It's
right.
just it's a different approach. It's not like the fog on the moor and
Yeah.
you feel the weather and you know that the city is kind of sinking its claws into you. It's not that kind of dark.
Yeah, like for all we said about how the city, the novel makes Hong Kong sound like a hamster wheel of hard work and economically
Mm-hmm.
oppressive. Maybe I'm just saying this because I was a tourist both times, but parts of the book did make me want to go back and soak it all in.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
We're getting off topic here. The topic was trying to get to was the crime genre. So first things first, we actually met in a genre fiction, Chinese genre fiction setting. It was that one symposium I'm constantly bringing up on the show, run by the Leeds Center for New Chinese Writing, and the genres that the symposium was focused on were two in particular. It wasn't genre in general per se. It was sci-fi and crime, and that is how the episode on the Untouched Crime came about.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you before. I guess before reading and translating The Untouched Crime, had you had much contact with Chinese crime novels, or like since then as well? Do you feel like you're a font of knowledge on the genre in Chinese?
不敢当, I think would be the best Chinese response to that. No, I don't find myself to be a font of knowledge. But also, I think that there's not as much that comes through in translation, and I'm certainly not reading enough in the original Chinese to kind of see the whole field. I have read Death Note, which you've also read. I've read a bit of The Evil Hypnotist, which is also by Zhou Haohui. That has not
Mm,
been translated yet, to my knowledge. But generally, I think we kind of covered this earlier. It's just that mainland Chinese mysteries slash crime fiction have an advantage in that they don't seem to have set rules. There's not necessarily an end point that they have to reach, and there's not necessarily certain things that the main character has to say. So that ambiguity can be kind of fun. However, because there aren't as many rules, and because for whatever reason stories often get published a little bit too quickly, stuff isn't always edited as carefully, there can be a lot of bugs. And by bug, I mean like a plot hole or an inconsistency where you think, hey, this character wouldn't do that. Or
yeah,
any kind of plot hole. So I find that to be kind of annoying in crime fiction. And if you're really accustomed to like a Scandi noir where everything fits perfectly, or if you read so much crime fiction that you have very high expectations, then maybe Chinese crime fiction can surprise you, and that can be a good surprise or a bad surprise. We just need more of it, I think. We need more to compare and more stuff
yeah.
translated.
That brought two things to mind. Hopefully I'll describe one, then I won't have forgotten the other. One was I remember when I was researching or doing some background snooping for the episode I did with Zach Haluza on Death Notice. I was looking on good old Douban and using auto translate because my Chinese reading is not good. And I was reading reader reviews of The Untouched Crime. And I noticed a lot of them were talking about like the level of the crime novel in China. Like this is a domestic
Mm-hmm.
crime fiction, and saying this is the best product. Maybe this was Google Translate speaking and not the Chinese, but like this is the best product Chinese crime writers have put together. Or, oh, it's not quite as good. There's this plot hole, that plot hole. Or no, it's great. There's no plot holes. And I remember thinking, damn, are these people really, does everything have to be analyzed through like national strength comparison with other countries? God
Yeah.
damn it, nationalistic, cursing in my head. But it's not like those concerns aren't valid. Like if Scottish writers or even writers in the UK were consistently putting out crap compared with other stuff that was available in English, yeah, maybe it would be a concern I had. And the fact that plot holes are an issue, that's a really genre specific problem of attention to detail. That like if I know from doing this show and reading up on Chinese lit, editors are just less of a thing.
Yes.
They don't have as much authority. They don't do as much work.
As far as we can tell, in mainland China. I'm not going to speak for Taiwan and Hong Kong.
Right. Yeah, in the mainland, as far as we can tell. And I guess some genres like fantasy, not to shit on fantasy, or like literary magical realism, which aren't under such strict rigor to make sense on a really basic plot level, they might even benefit from a lighter editor's touch and more power for the author. But here, like in crime fiction, it stands or falls on its tightness and lack of plot holes. So I realized I was wrong to mentally accuse those reviewers of being power obsessed nationalists or picky about those little things, because that just means they're fans of the genre, really, and that they care about writers in their own country, which is, you can't hate on someone for that. That's silly. So that's Chinese crime novels. Yes, the other thing I was going to say about that was if you compare that to reception of other genre fiction translated to English from Chinese, I don't think it has any cheerleaders, and it doesn't have any. Perhaps the translator who's done the most Chinese to English crime translation might be you, if you get those two other
books out.
Yeah, I think it would be you, because like if I think of Chinese sci-fi, that has so many cheerleaders in translation. Of course, it's got Ken Liu. There's the academic Ming Wei Song or Song Ming Wei. There's a ton of former guests of this show, like Shui Ni, who we had on the show, who's also a translator, who's interested in the genre. Liu Guanzhao, our pal, who I don't know if that was your first time meeting him, but we were with him at the Genre Fiction Symposium. He and Angela Chan running something like the London Chinese Science Fiction Group. So that genre has all these stans and fans who are out there shouting about it and studying it for fun and academically. And wuxia is the other big one that jumps to mind. That's got its fans. It's got translators who are focused on it, write blog posts about it and stuff. And then there's wuxia's cousin Xianxia, the web fiction, which it's more of an online thing, appropriately perhaps. But like there are people who focus on it and are somewhat expert in it and can speak to English language audiences or newbies about it. But like I don't know where I would go if I was looking for an education in Chinese crime. Maybe Jeffrey Kinkley, the gent from the US, he would be an expert, but he's lucky enough to not be so online. He's just on Facebook, I think. He's not out there on Twitter firing out hot takes on Chan Ho-kei and Sijin Chen.
Yeah, I remain optimistic. I think that in the future, we'll get more attention for the genre and hopefully get more authors translated. I came across a lot of interesting names while just reading about the other books that Chan Ho-kei has been reading. He did a really good job kind of naming others and trying to give them a little tiny bit of spotlight in his interviews. So hopefully, some publisher will take interest, or some translator will take it upon themselves to say, this story is so awesome, we must bring it into the English language. There's still time, there's still possibilities for it to happen, but I agree with you that it's not there yet. It doesn't have the attention or the fans the way sci-fi does.
Yeah, I think not to be cynical here, but it doesn't have the I think the things that help Chinese sci-fi is just the political angle, especially with Three Body. Like it's just inevitable, the catch up with mainland China in terms of technology with the West. It's just, and
if stuff is getting self-censored, then that social issues, being a reflection of what China is really like, that angle is not possible. It gets scrubbed out before it gets translated, and therefore you miss out on a lot. And
then wuxia has an advantage of like being a vehicle for, I don't know whether I want to put this in quote marks or not, but like the ancient China traditions, values, costumes, whereas crime fiction, it's that little bit, it's sort of by necessity a little bit mundane and modern. So it doesn't have those angles.
Super fans. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So this is where I get flashy. I pirated an academic book just so.
You're so honest.
Yeah. Well, let me see who the author is. Maybe he's a sort of an N figure. Yeah, if Stephen Knight, come at me, send your drones. I mean, he's I get the impression from the book that he's a Marxist scholar. So really, he should be all for a little bit of digital transmission of learning material, consciousness raising materials.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, right. So I'm just going to read a few segments. This might take me a little minute, and I haven't got any pre-prepared thoughts on them, but I think they should give us something to riff on. So here's the first one. It's just from the intro. A less evaluative approach has tried to establish why crime fiction is so compelling. W.H. Auden and C. Day Lewis, writing as Nicholas Blake, see the form as a substitute for religious patterns of certainty. Ralph Harper, Gavin Lambert, and several psychoanalysts find the basis of its patterns in the psychic anxieties of writers and readers. Another type of analysis has seen social attitudes and the pressures of the modern environment as the basic drive in the crime fiction. Colin Watson and Thomas Narsajak have in different ways related the stories to the collective patterns of modern experience. Before I jump to the next quote, I should say this book is called Form and Ideology in Crime Fiction, and it's from the 80s, I think. Yeah, it's from 1980. So it's not brand new. Okay, next quote. This is just a really short thing I've highlighted. It said, before the detective appeared, there were stories that suggested how crime could be controlled. I think that's interesting, although how we'll get to it, I don't know. And then this next thing, this is a really long section of text I've highlighted, so bear with me here. Throughout all this material runs a belief in the unity of society, and organic metaphors are very often used. Crimes injurious to their country, acts harmful to the body of the state. Society, the stories imply, can deal with its own aberrances without mediation, without specialists. The watch will arrest an identified criminal and the courts will pass sentence, but no skilled agent is needed to detect the criminal. The processes of the law are in the background, and its officers serve society only in established and variable ways. They are not independent agents acting upon society. This whole organic view emerges strikingly in the common feature where a criminal is executed or hung in chains near the scene of a crime. In many ways, the stories are shaped to give a model of unmediated social control of crime. I'm going to pause here and jump in and say he's talking about like very early Victorian crime stories. I'm going to resume the quote here. It's easy enough to see that these two systems of detecting crime, personal guilt, and social observation could only develop in a deeply Christian world with small social units where everybody is known, where hiding is hard and socialization tends to be public. That had been the general situation in medieval England, though the notorious difficulty of finding and convicting medieval criminals suggests that the crime control system implicit in the Newgate calendar, that must be the book he's studying, was never more than a brave hope. But in the period when the stories were printed, the implied social model was disappearing. Not everybody was devotedly Christian. Many people lived in enlarged and increasing conurbations, and there was a hardened and relatively successful criminal class hostile to the normal society, which had in London at least its own fortress, later known as the Rookeries of Central London. I guess I just wanted to say, doesn't this sound almost totally opposite of Second Sister?
Interesting.
Where like there's no detective, society has the means to sort out the criminal just because it's functional. It's able to sort it out itself, and what else? It's anyone can be easily found,
identified,
because the society is made of so small social units where everyone's known and no one's anonymous. And it mentions later that starts to change with urbanization, which you could see as the very start on a trajectory towards what we're living in now, digital anonymity.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of kind of classic English language, Anglophone authors that always set their stories in tiny villages.
Right.
So you do get that small town feel, and everybody knows everybody, and gossip is rife, that kind of thing. Whereas in Second Sister, even though people know each other, it's, they have to narrow down the list of possible candidates using all kinds of tricks and the help of computers to really make things work. So in that respect, I would say kind of the approach to the genre is really different, but you still have to kind of set up your set of characters. And once you've introduced that finite number, you can't pull out a new person at the end, I suppose.
Mm.
And more importantly, the thing you said at the beginning in terms of there's a unity of society, I think through the popcorn forum, there's still this feeling that society still believes bad guys should be punished. Society still believes that someone who commits sexual assault on a train is a sleazeball. You know, there's still a sort of unity, and people like Chung-nam are still considered to be awful by everyone. It's just that they can escape detection a little bit better.
Right. Yeah. There's some moral, what's the word? Continuity there. And it's pretty, as we said, it's stronger than it might be other places in the world.
So it's interesting. I do think that the genre has to evolve, or as Chan Ho-kei says, it needs to be localized a little bit to make sense for the setting that it's put in, or for the author that's writing about the society that they know best. But at the same time, that kind of resolving of, you know, this is someone who's acting completely against our agreed values of what is just or of what is fair. And at the end, we're going to catch him. Doesn't matter how big the city is, we're going to catch him. And that's how we can understand the parts of our society that need fixing and the parts of our society that we like and we want to keep promoting.
We're saying there that, yeah, we agree. There's still some kind of societal agreement that people like Chung-nam are criminals and they shouldn't get a free pass. Do you think it's significant that although we have a solo detective like we would have had in Sherlock Holmes, as far as I remember, he's not really working with the police at all. It's justice is totally outsourced to this guy who's working in like the black online and offline market. Do you think there's anything we can say about that?
I mean, again, it's a little bit of that persona thing. For the most part, he wants people to think that he's a complete loner and that he's not going to pass on information to others, or he's not supposed to be associated with anyone else, good or bad. But at the end, when he wants to take Chung-nam down, it's important for him to kind of build that case. So he sends individual emails to 6 people that he knows were deeply affected by Chung-nam's actions and says, you need to approach the police. They've just received information about all the terrible crimes he's committed. So at the end of the day, N is actively using Hong Kong's criminal justice system, to take down Chung-nam rather than just making him lose his job or just, making him lose money or something. He specifically wants that person in jail and being punished according to society's agreed system of punishing these kinds of criminals. He offers, or he pretends to offer, like, oh, shouldn't we take down that construction company that never compensated your family for your dad's death, that kind of thing. And he leaves it hanging there. But again, I think that's him pretending that he doesn't care. And he's only going to act like a knight in shining armor if there's an individual that will benefit from it. But actually, he's keenly aware of what society thinks is right and is wrong. And kind of, I don't know if I would say the criminal justice system is a tool to him, but he's more than happy to use it if that's going to be the most effective way to take somebody down. It's just, he'll use all the possibilities. He doesn't think that he needs to work outside of the system or that he cannot work as a team. He has all kinds of folks that help him complete his job. He's not completely a lone wolf, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, no, I confess I'd forgotten exactly how the ending went down, but no, that's a really good point, that he's not the pure vigilante we might have thought at first. And that the two ways that the examples you gave there are interesting, because he doesn't become the vigilante trying to bring about a justice that is not too controversial against one nasty individual. Like, he doesn't show up and headshot Chung-nam or something.
Yes.
But he's also got, what can I say? He's not totally rogue either. Like, if he wanted to, he could bring down this huge company and it would be justified, but that would be a very radical move with massive consequences, and it would imply some maybe deeper rejection of some norms, the business economic norms of the city, something that, who knows, maybe this Marxist academic Stephen Knight would have cheered on, but N doesn't take it there because, I don't know, he probably knows that's a very huge step, despite him having very far-reaching powers and doing some pretty bold things. What am I trying to say? He doesn't do stuff just because he can. He has
Exactly.
some self-imposed limits. Yeah, I think we may have, or I may have drawn attention away from arguably the more interesting bit I quoted at the start about psychic anxieties. So stuff people worry about in a particular society. And it's underlined here that it's a modern society, that crime novels are modern.
Yes.
Like there's obviously some obvious stuff about the ways we could be attacked from the internet. But here's the question I can ask. Do you think in terms of our fears and anxieties, N or Chung-nam is the scarier character? Because N is the guy who could destroy your life absolutely using any online tool. Chung-nam does nastier stuff, but he's I don't know, they represent very different kinds of danger, internet danger. One's nasty and personal and less omnipotent, and then N is what can I say?
Seems like nothing can stop him.
Yeah, that's like the internet nuke. If that comes for you, game over. Which one do you think is scarier?
Yeah, I think N is definitely scarier, but fortunately, with great power comes great responsibility, and he seems to be able to keep his power in check. He's just so much smarter. So again, he's working at a higher level. He's able to play someone like Chung-nam, who even would notice if his phone was hacked remotely and things like that. Like he's able to just use social engineering and other tricks to figure out where his weaknesses are and still take him down. Whereas Chung-nam doesn't even suspect. He's like, oh, Americans are so friendly. You know, he just explains away anything that N does as, oh, well, that must be just because life is great for me right now. Everything's going the way I want it to go. So I think that's less scary because he's slightly more predictable. So either you give him space and you don't mess with him, then you're safe from Chung-nam, or you kind of, like with enough conversations, I think a lot of people could realize what Chung-nam is all about, and therefore they would still be safe. Whereas N, it takes ages to figure out what he's about. And he might show you like level 1 of his thinking, but actually he's also operating on 2 through 11. So it's so hard to predict. And then therefore it's so hard to protect yourself if he decides to kind of unleash his wrath on you.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I said before that I think myself and probably loads of other people, although they might have some intelligence, they maybe overestimate it and flash it about too much. Because I've met people who I thought, wow, you're very smart, but don't you know it? You're smart because you're showing me you're smart, and I'm very impressed. But the people who've impressed me more, and I think it's fair to say have sometimes spooked me, are the ones who are obviously very smart and perceptive and have a lot of common sense. They're not floating away in the clouds. They're very pragmatic, but you can see that they have a deeper abstract grasp on lots of stuff, but like they don't flash it at all. They're usually quite nice people, but some of them I met, yeah. And that makes me all the more jealous that they're also able to be jealous of them, that they're able to be warm. The opposite of Chung-nam, who's cold as a fish, I suppose. But then occasionally, once or twice, I've maybe met someone like that, and I can't tell if either they don't have the warmth, or you can't tell if it's an act or not. And I found if I start thinking about those people, trying to work out how perceptive they really are, or what are they really thinking about, the thing that scares me is that I have no idea, because they might be several dimensions above me in the complexity of how they go about their day-to-day life.
Yeah. I don't think I've met as many people like that before, but I completely agree. When you feel like, oh, there's a depth here that I'm not even plumbing. It's just, no, that can be really unsettling.
Yeah. So our next section is the Chinese word of the day. And this is weirdly one I ran into, because you let me know in advance what you've chosen. For the Patreon bonus episode I recently recorded, I reread Coming Up Light by Chen Xiufan. Speaking of people who are probably got 5D brains, I think he's one. And that story has a few different memes referenced in it, or at least internet slang or events, some from the global or Western internet and others from the Chinese internet. And one of them is actually the term you've chosen today that is also in Second Sister. So do you want to unveil it for the listeners?
Our word of the day is 人肉搜索引擎. That's translated as human flesh search engine.
sounds gross, but it's not as gross as it sounds. Do you want to
True.
explain it for the listeners?
So basically, that's when a lot of users on a platform or somewhere on the internet provide personal information about someone who allegedly did something wrong. They might provide an address, phone number, photographs, school or workplace. It happens in China a lot, it seems, but I mean, it also happens in other countries. So yeah, they came up with a word for it. And because it's a lot of different humans contributing that information, that's where the human flesh part comes in.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I know there's a Wikipedia page which breaks it down and mentions that it's used for, I guess one word we'd use in English is doxing,
Yes.
but collective doxing. Like as an individual,
Yes.
I could try and dox someone, but in English, I could dox someone on my own, or me and you as a team could dox someone, or I could team up with 10 people who I know in real life or only online. We could dox someone and unveil all their address and their secret history. But the English word doesn't specify whether I'm an individual, a duo, or a huge team. Whereas this Chinese term is specifically like crowdsourced
The
sleuthing in a
hive
way.
is going
The
at it.
hive,
Yeah.
yeah. And the Wikipedia page does mention that the human flesh search engine can involve some offline research as well. But the point is, it's a collaborative work done online. So, like, I don't know, let's say you and me want to, I'll use a cartoonish example. We want to go after Xi Jinping and dox him.
Oh God.
And maybe I'm on holiday to the Canary Islands and I managed to socially engineer my way into the bank vaults or the computer system that has his offshore account. Then I would relay that information to you. And what made that human flesh search engine is that we shared the info online, even though the majority of the sleuthing was offline. So yeah, it's an interesting one. Yeah, the other thing I was going to mention is it can be quite nasty as well. Like, have you ever heard of 4chan?
Yes.
Yeah, the troll website. There's a form of like human flesh search engine doxing they do there. They have a very politically incorrect term for it. What do they call it? Weaponized autism. So that they describe themselves as being these.
God.
Yeah, it's that's the sense of humor they have there, I guess, where they consider they're happy to identify as like socially unadept shut-ins, but their joke is that they collectively use the power against people they want to target. Could be something really horrible, or it could be like something less personal, more political, but that's the term they use. But it's a useless term for a book because it's so on PC. You wouldn't really want to give it, what's the word, validate it by using it in your everyday speech. Whereas the Chinese term sounds a bit icky, but it's not as, I guess it's, as far as I'm aware, it's not in one icky corner of the internet. It's a bit more normalized.
I'm glad you mentioned it though, because it's important to realize that it happens in every country. It's kind of a human instinct to want to collect information, to want to take somebody down if you're fairly certain that they did something bad, rather than taking the time to double check and fact check. I think even if 4chan is not exactly the same as some other websites, it's still, that's an instinct that all kinds of people have all over the world.
Yeah, and it's interesting what the kind of things galvanize people. I don't know if it's a thing in the States. I know it's a thing in the UK, where there are like vigilante groups who coalesce around trying to trap pedophiles. Basically, that's a thing they'll do. And I don't know how much they cooperate with the police, but that is an example from the UK of like a collective, maybe not a human flesh search engine, but a digitally coordinated group of people seeking their own idea of what justice should be against people who are breaking a really fundamental social norm, doing something nasty like Chung Nam does.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that exists in the US, so I'm afraid we'll have to leave that unanswered.
Yeah, yeah, we don't really want to go too far down that wormhole. Next question. I know I said miscellaneous questions would be light, and I totally failed to keep it light, but this next one should be. So recently we replaced compare the book with a drink, because I think that's been drained dry. Instead, we're doing pair the story with a piece of music. So what piece of music would you want the listeners to listen to as they read the book or set the movie adaptation to?
Yeah, so I would recommend Ad Infinitum, which is a song by Oh the City. And it just barely has words in it, but I think it would work very well as a soundtrack that kind of plays in the background while people are shooting along the MTR or racing behind somebody in a van. Yeah.
So another transport-related
I suppose
navigation the city. Yeah. Sorry, were you going to say something?
No, go ahead.
Okay. I thought of one too. It's the soundtrack for Mr. Robot, that TV show I mentioned before. It's especially the soundtrack for season 1. I don't know if it lost its originality for the later seasons or if just the music dropped off a bit, but for the soundtrack for season 1 is really iconic. It's an electronic. It's very sparse and moody and weird. The best bits of it in the show you'd associate with the main character, Elliot, because he's really alienated and lost. And although he's an amazing hacker, like his mental health basically is always in the bin. He's really not a happy, functional human being on lots of levels. Whereas our hacker in this story, N, I don't know, he might not be the happiest guy, but he seems totally in control of himself emotionally. If he's got turmoil under the surface, we don't see it. So if I was going to play the music as like a character's theme, it would have to be Nga-Yee as she grieves and gets thrown in way over her head into the digital world, or Chung-nam, because clearly he's not very mentally healthy or happy.
Interesting. Yeah, so there we go. When the film version of the book is made, we can include both songs.
Brilliant. And I should clarify for listeners, I'm not thinking of any particular part of the soundtrack.
That's a good point. That's a lot of songs, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a good hour. Probably the main theme, which I will not hum because I would put everyone else listening to. You can insert it.
You can put it in post.
Yes, that's what I'm going to do. Right, next one. Now, this is going to be something freeloading listeners won't hear all of. I've introduced a new segment where I'm going to do bonus questions. So this will be up as its own episode on the show's Patreon, cool. Which they can get to. Listeners, you can get to, just go to patreon.com/Truchfic, TRCHFIC, and you can hear the answer to this question. So here's the question for yourself, Michelle. We're going to look at the conventional definition of a psychopath, which I am just going to open up because I did not have
I think that's really interesting.
Right. I think we're good to close off the bonus question. I can feel my brain running out of juice.
Sounds good.
All right. Okay. Welcome back, freeloading listeners. I bet you would like to know what we just talked about. Well, it's all there on the Patreon, along with something like 70 bonus episodes now, averaging about half an hour long. There's a gold mine there, so go seek it out. But keeping the ball rolling, we're on to the very last questions for you, Michelle. They're the further reading questions. So some pointers for the listeners, and pointers that hopefully aren't behind Patreon paywalls. So if listeners want to read more books like Second Sister, where could we point them?
If you haven't read The Borrowed by Chan Ho-kei, definitely do. It's also set in Hong Kong. It's also got the mysteries, and I really enjoyed it. If you're interested in other English fiction that takes place in a specific city, I would recommend Ian Rankin, whose stories are set in Scotland.
There
And
you
also
go.
Ingrid Thoft. She was recommended to me by an algorithm on Storygraph. Her novels are set in Boston, Massachusetts, and I went right through that trilogy. I really enjoyed her novels.
Cool. I'm actually a bit stumped today. I can't think of any really good recommendations apart from the other crime novels I've read for this show. So I'll just say, haven't read any Ian Rankin, but he's very popular in my family, and my family have fantastic tastes, so that must be a good sign. But also, the specific city he operates in is Edinburgh, and there is we were mentioning earlier about dropping by real places. I'm sure his books are good for that. If you're ever in Edinburgh, you could do an Ian Rankin tour, and you can drop into his regular pub as well. I've done that. I did that when I was living in Edinburgh.
That sounds so great.
Yeah, it's like the pub is very central and yet somehow manages to be a bit grim as well. I remember a lot of stone, and you'll definitely know if you found it because there's pictures of the guy himself inside.
Got it.
How often he goes, I don't know, but I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but I will put that in the show notes for listeners along with your book recommendations, Michelle. Right now, the very last question: what are you reading just now?
I just started a book called A Visit from the Goon Squad by Jennifer Egan. It was a recommendation from my cousin. Shout out to Paul Deeter.
Hello, Mr. P.
It's really good. It's really fun.
Does it have any relation to this one?
I think our discussions about persona and either fitting into society or deciding not to fit into society, those decisions that we make every single day, that would definitely overlap. But I'm only at the beginning, so I don't know exactly what's going to happen.
All right, cool. Were you waiting to ask what I'm reading?
Yes.
All right. So this one is interesting because there was a COVID scare in my workplace this last Monday, and they've asked us to work from home until we can do a PCR test. And in the UK, I've learned if you don't have a car and you're in a small town in the English countryside and you get sent PCR test kits with missing pieces, or if there's no good priority post boxes in your town, if you're trying to post the thing off on a weekend, you're a bit buggered. So I've been rather delayed in my return to the office, which would be fine, except the book I was reading is on my desk there. So I've been cut off from my lovely book, which is a very weird, truly weird pseudo-philosophical book called Spinal Catastrophism, which is a J.G. Ballard style tracing of a line of thought from Western thinkers, a sort of not very good science, but interesting line of thought that as you go down the spine or you go through the development of the human body, you're going back in geological time to earlier like biological states, just the same as you tunnel through the ground. It doesn't really make a great deal of coherent sense. It's supposed to be not completely rigorous, but philosophically interesting. And it's very dense and hard to read as well. So I was struggling through that, but it's been set aside by COVID. So I picked up a much more rigorously scientific and readable book along similar lines that I got from the bookshop called Metazoa, which is about the origins of consciousness in animals, looking at mostly animals that live under the sea. So I'm on octopuses right now, and cephalopods, I think they're called. But
no idea.
my girlfriend corrected me on this. But yeah, that's what I'm reading. I really think it's got nothing to do with Second Sister. And I don't know if I'm ever going to do a book for the show that will be relevant to those themes, but that's what I'm reading.
I mean, being reading widely is a great thing, and making crazy connections that nobody else can make is also fun.
I guess how it does relate to the show is I'm mining into stuff I read in the past, so I can buy some time to read some non-Chinese stuff. That's really what's going on.
There you go. Perfect.
I think I have no more questions. Is there anything we've missed that you have a burning desire to get out there into the microphone?
I think we've covered everything.
All right, cool. In that case, I'll say thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Alright, we've come to the end of the show, so you probably know what's next. It's the plugs, although I think this time I'm just going to do the really simple one, which is to direct you to the show's website. Loads of links in the show notes point to just different spots on the website, especially the handy Trucific links at the bottom. But if you're listening on a podcast provider where you can't get those links or you can't see them for whatever reason, for example on iTunes I just use a shortened version, then just go to the Trucific homepage. That's trucific.podbean.com, trchfic.podbean.com, and there's loads of great stuff there. I've made a map which tracks like all the authors' hometowns and story settings on like a custom Google map. That is up there. There is art for every single episode. I make a beautiful sort of, it was originally designed as a YouTube thumbnail, but they're up on the site just as episode arts there. There's a link to a place where you can get various episodes as transcripts in transcript form. So handy if you've got, if you have some kind of inability to listen, something that hampers your access through auditory means, or if you just need a resource that you can copy and paste or search through with the old Control F feature. It's only something like 5 episodes, but you know, it's there for you to enjoy. I have tags so you can browse the episodes by category. For example, we have one called Hong Kong Writers that this one will be going under. I may also have a crime fiction tag. I'll need to check that. But yeah, just all sorts of cool stuff is there. And that's the only plug I'm gonna do today, because I already plugged the Patreon twice in the intro and the main body. So it would be a bit of a piss take if I kept throwing that onto you guys. So I guess I'll just say the most important thing you can do for the show, and that is to spread the word. So tell anyone you know who you think might be interested. You never know. Telling people is free, costs nothing, just a few seconds of your life and some air in your lungs. I'm sure you can spare that. So yeah, tell your friends, tell your family, tell your teachers, tell your co-workers in the high intensity office job that you work in, you know, working hard or hardly working, as they say. Tell your network administrator, and make sure that said administrator is not being impersonated by an anonymous figure accessing your network through the Tor browser, because that could just end awfully for you. And speaking of ending, 再见.